as a former D1 athlete, a former soccer player, and now working on MyHuddle, where our mission is to make sports psychology and mental health training accessible to all athletes. And I'm so excited to be joined here by Dylan and Lisa. Hopefully I saw your name on here, popping on soon, who are going to share their amazing expertise with all of you. And I'm happy to be serving as moderator here and getting to facilitate this dialogue. But definitely, throw questions in the chat, and we want to make this interactive. So first, I just want to set the stage a little bit before we do intros with Dylan and Lisa about why this conversation of the importance of hiring mental wellness experts on and off the field. Why does it matter? And I come at this from being a former soccer player and now working in this space. And so great to see so many of you joining this conversation. And I think if we look at just, think about all of you are probably soccer players, were or currently are, or some related to sport. And I want you to think about the type of professionals that you worked with, during your soccer tenure. Keep your hand raised. Did you have a head coach? Did you have an assistant coach? Did you have maybe an athletic trainer or a physical therapist at some point that you worked with, or a strength and conditioning coach? Probably your hand is raised, still raised. Now, did you ever have anyone that worked on and was focused on the mental side of your training and health? My guess is very few people actually had someone dedicated on staff that they had during their player tenure. And if you think about that, that's pretty insane, right? And so, why is that is the question. Well, I think in the past, there's been misunderstanding and stigma around the idea of working on your mental health proactively. And there's been budget constraints. And I think the good thing is that we're seeing this shift, right? We're seeing this shift in terms of recognition of the importance of athlete mental health, and organizations now stepping up and saying, we need to have these types of people on staff. We need to have a Dylan and Lisa, on staff and part of our team. And, there's really important to all of us, I think, having lived through COVID. We know that there's a mental health crisis out there with our youth. And we also know that there's shortage of mental health counselors. And, today, I think the wait time on average is 25 days. 37% of Americans live in a place where there's a shortage of mental health counselors. And so what excites me is rethinking about how can we solve this challenge, right? How can we not just accept the status quo and have innovative solutions to making sure that our young athletes are getting the mental support and training that they need in a proactive and preventative way, rather than waiting for that mental health crisis. So that's what fires me up, and that's connected to our mission at MyHuddle. And now I want to bring it over to Dylan and Lisa with a kickoff question as I set the stage there. Our goal today is that all of you listeners here walk away with just an understanding of what it means to be a mental wellness expert and how you can bring these types of professionals into your world with your athletes and teams. So introductions, Dylan, I'll have you kick it off. Why don't you introduce yourself and say a little bit about, what do you do? Where do you currently work today? And what led you into this line of work?
Yeah, definitely. Super excited to be here today, guys. Oh, that's weird. My camera just... super excited to be here to talk about, obviously, the importance of mental health clinicians within sport context. I grew up playing soccer myself, and I work with a lot of different teams, but soccer has always been near and dear to my heart. So any opportunity to get to work more closely with players, coaches, and folks in the field is something I'm always interested in. But yeah, so I'm the Assistant Athletic Director of Mental Health and Performance here at the University of Georgia Athletics Association. Have been here for about 6 months. Came over from University of Southern California, where I was at for the last about 6 or 7 years. Oh, awesome. I'm glad we were able to, at least was able to join us. Hey. Yeah, so in my role, I work in both integrating the mental health and the performance aspects of support for our student athletes here at Georgia. And so that can look like traditional mental health services within a clinical context of meeting in our offices, myself and our 2 other clinicians for therapy, individual support with anxiety, depression, and the kind of general mental health aspects of college functioning. But the part that I'm most interested in and passionate about, and I think this conversation will really touch on, is the importance of integrated support for athletes, right? That like we can help athletes improve their performance on the field when we're actually providing well-rounded, holistic support for all aspects of functioning. And so from what we do in our model, and really the aspect of my work that I feel most passionate about, and kind of going to your first part of that question, Christina, of what brought me to the field is that piece, is that too often our athletes are only kind of validated for their identity within sport, and then as a byproduct of that, how successful or what performance outcomes they've had. And what we know, and frankly, one of the greatest things about our field right now is in the last couple of years, professional athletes being willing to speak to this dynamic, is that the more that happens and we're only reinforced for success in sport, then failure is just like so detrimental to our self-concept. Like we struggle in any capacity and we feel absolutely worthless as a person. But yet ask any athlete, just like you did when we started this, raise your hand if you've ever failed in your sport. Every hand goes up, right? So like we know failure is inevitable to success and achievement and growth. And yet when all we're reinforced for is our achievement, then any bit of adversity just destroys our confidence and destroys our self-concept. And so that's why for me, I'm so passionate about helping athletes explore the fullness of who they are, actually building up other aspects of identity, not just sport identity, because it actually leads to increased wellness, satisfaction, meaning, and purpose in sport, which then means I can have an off day today and I can get right back on the training field tomorrow and be just as motivated and encouraged, because my failure doesn't have to impact my self-worth. My failure is just a stepping stone to getting better and improving, right? And so you separate the two. And that's the piece for me that's kind of the most exciting about what we do.
Amazing. I'm sure there are tons of heads nodding right now. Thank you so much for that intro. And now, Lisa, I'd love to turn it over to you. I know Lisa and I it feels like we go way back, having connected and shared our passion for this work. And Lisa is an incredible individual in what she's doing. So Lisa, why don't you share, what do you do? Where do you currently work? And what inspired you to come to this line of work?
Thanks, Christina. Hi, Dylan. I'm happy to be here with you guys. Yes, Christina, we've connected. Connect with you again. Let's see. I do a couple of things. So I work for the Roots, the Oakland Roots Sports Club here in Oakland. I'm an entrepreneur. I have a private practice. I have a podcast. So I love being able to use the skills I was trained in as a licensed clinical social worker outside of the room, so to speak, right? That I can use it in other ways to bring awareness about mental health and sport performance. And it's just cool. It keeps my day and my life diverse, which is good for me. But for the Oakland Roots, I'm their mental health and sport performance coach. I'm able to see them, interact with them, hang out with them at the facility. I have an office there. I'm there in the mornings during their prehab time to kind of just hang out, socialize, kind of just connect, build that rapport, a space. Because in the end, just like any relationship, there needs to be us. There needs to be a getting to know you, a kind of opportunity to, like, if I wanted to talk about my life or my performance on the field, I kind of get who the person is I'm talking to, which I think is super important. And so the structure is I'm there. I schedule appointments in the morning. I observe and watch training sessions. I go to home games, all noting and observing kind of their interaction as a team, their interaction as individuals, their roles on the team. These guys, as Dylan was saying, athletes are human. They're more than what they do. And so there's a lot of things going on with the guys off the field that will impact how they perform on the field, and being able to have a place for them to explore that, have a different perspective, utilize some techniques and skills to help them manage life. I mean, one guy just got engaged. One guy is about to have a baby. One guy's wife is coming from another country here and he's been without her. So there's life that these things impact, and being able to give them the space to talk about it. I think, what brought me to this is I was an athlete myself. I played soccer. Christina knows this, from age 7 to 17. And then I had an injury. And at that point, my only identities were student athlete and soccer player. And when that soccer player identity was taken away from me due to injury, I didn't have the resources or access to be able to physically and mentally recover from that. And I kind of tucked that away. That was traumatic for me. I didn't know how to process that. Lo and behold, my daughter, who's 15 now, is a high performing softball player, and she struggled with perfectionism, lack of belief, very difficult for her to let go of mistakes. And so I was like, wait a minute, I think I know how to help her. You know, my as a mom, my heart's breaking, but I think my profession is going to help me, form me to help her. And when I did and saw some progress, it was very rewarding. I was like, wait a minute, girl who's competing, the only athlete who's competing who goes through these things. And so I was like, you know, I'm gonna pivot a little bit. I'm gonna learn more about this area. So I went back to school, got mentored hours, gonna soon be certified in sport performance, and inspired by her, truly. So the sport performance now for me is married to the clinical experience and training that I've had for over 20 years. And together, like, I feel, I tell people all the time, I feel like I'm 20 years younger because I'm able to really kind of lean in and sink into my purpose right now. And it's really exciting and really just rewarding. And I feel honored to get to know the people that I get to work with.
Amazing. Thank you for that intro. And I think both of you touched on this idea of just holistic care for the athlete, right? And athlete identity and not being so singularly focused. So the other thing I want to observe is that both of you have some interesting acronyms after your names. And, you know, as part of that integrative care, what I've learned diving into this world is that you can come at supporting the athlete's mental well-being through different backgrounds. So Lisa, why don't you first explain the acronyms after your name and what that means?
Thank you for that. Yes. And I think this is an important discussion because it helps inform the athlete to identify what would work for them. So, licensed clinical social worker in California. The CSW is clinical social worker in Nevada. So I'm licensed in those two states. A licensed clinical social worker is someone who's gone to grad school for 2.5, 3 years in clinical social work. So there's a lot of people out there like social work is one thing. It's the thing you see in the movies or the TV, or like that they work for child protective services or like go and do home visits and things like that. That's one role that social workers can do. And that's a specific role. So social workers can do research. We can write books. We can educate on. The clinical piece is actually doing the therapy where we can prevent mental health injury. We can treat it. We can diagnose it. We can create a treatment plan. We can create a plan for recovery, just like we do with physical health. But in our area, it's the psychological health, the mental well-being, the mental health. That is what's going on. And the athlete population is the population I serve right now. That hasn't always been the population, but that's what I serve right now. And it took, 2.5, 3 years of school, mentored hours for about 3 to 5 years, or so, like we have to get over 3,000 hours by a clinician already in the field, discussing all aspects of our work. And then back in the day when I got licensed, we had to take, I took a written exam and then an oral exam to pass. So that's what those are. And then these days we are working towards a universal licensure where we can treat in all states. That's hopefully to come. And so I did go ahead and get my license transfer over to Nevada as well, so I could serve the athletes in that state. And just a side note, my hope is that I can add the CMPC there in just a few months and join the ranks of my boy here, Dylan. So that's what I'm working towards.
Great, thank you. Dylan, now to you.
Yeah, Christina, I think this is a really great question. And in some ways, it's a really important question within our field because of a good sort of problem, which is that more and more universities, athletic departments, professional teams are creating roles within their organizations for exactly this, for mental health and performance positions, clinicians. The tricky part is that not everybody understands, just like this question. So what are all these letters? What do they actually mean? And like, what do you do? And the challenge here is that there are a lot of different ways to get training in a performance side of sport, like performance enhancement, helping athletes learn mental skills training, ways to improve from specifically a sport context. And that's certainly an aspect of what Lisa and I do. But the interesting thing, and Lisa was touching on this, is both of us have clinical backgrounds too, and clinical training and subsequent licenses. And what that allows us to do is the integrated work, right? So for me, I'm a doctor of psychology. I'm a psychologist. I'm licensed in California and now here in Georgia. And so we can treat the clinical piece to it, right? Like how is the depression that maybe somebody's experiencing or the anxiety impacting, yes, their sport, but also their relationships, their functioning in other aspects of their life. And this is the thing that I feel so strongly about, is that when we think about integrated identities, right, inevitably how we're doing in our lives outside of soccer is going to show up on the field, right? If we're doing great, if things are going really well, come to training that day, you're like, yeah, I can run the beef test 3 times today. Like, it'll be exciting. But if things are struggling outside of soccer, like in other aspects of your life, work, class, relationships, I promise you, it's going to show up on the field too, right? And so that's why I feel so strongly about having clinicians in these roles that have both components to it, right? That have that clinical training so that we can provide the therapeutic context from a mental health standpoint, but also the expertise in athletes, sport, team sort of systemic work, that we can integrate that into the performance context. And like Lisa said, being in the sport environment is so important. I work very closely with our soccer teams here and at my previous institution, and it makes all the difference in the world because they see us out there. They see us at training. They see us in the training room. They're like, oh yeah, if I'm struggling with an ankle injury, I go see my athletic trainer. If I'm struggling with confidence or like with how do I manage this feedback with my coach, I go see our performance enhancement, like our mental skills coordinator or our sports psychologist. And so it's so important that we are seeing just another one of the staff, and that we were able to provide that kind of integrated mental health and performance pieces.
Beautiful. Thank you. That was very well said. And touching on that, I think this leads well into my next question, which is about the show Ted Lasso. Are you both fans of the show, perhaps?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I have a funny story about it, but yes, definitely.
Great. Well, in Ted Lasso, they do an amazing job of depicting the role of a sports psychologist on the team and on staff. I'm curious for your thoughts, what do you think that they got right? And what do you think they got wrong about the role that a sports psychologist on staff can play? Let's see. I'll go to Dylan, you first.
Yeah, I love that season 2 of Ted Lasso had a sports psychologist involved. And I think it's such a great way of just further destigmatizing, right? The more we see these roles in these spaces, the more normalized it becomes for all of our athletes. Let's see, the part that I really liked about it was that she was present at the facility. She was present watching training and involved in other aspects of sport. It wasn't just like staying in my office exclusively, and that's the only space where I interact. That's essential. And the other part too that I think is really important, and if we have coaches and staff and other support individuals on this call, I think it's so important too, is that the interaction within the whole system. Our work, when it's done best in our roles, is, of course, we're helping the individual athlete, but we're also helping the coaches better communicate with their athletes, or the athletic trainers better connect to that athlete that's struggling with their ACL recovery and is really low on motivation because you're in that grind of rehab, right? Or even sometimes coaches communicating within each other, like establishing roles and how do they most effectively relate back to the team. And so you got to see some snapshots of that over the course of the season on Ted Lasso, as the whole system, right? The team, the coaches, everyone got more and more comfortable with that role, because there's still, they're relatively new positions within professional organizations. And so sometimes it's like educating the system, educating everyone, like, I can help with mental health, I can help with performance, but I can actually help all of you together best interact so that as a whole, the whole organization is as successful as possible.
Awesome, Dylan. I agree. I like that she was visible and interactive and observing kind of in the milieu, at training. It's funny because I'm like, everyone's like, is that how you do your work? I'm like, no, because not every sport performance specialist, mental health clinician is the same. You bring the biggest tool that we bring is ourselves and the way that we relate. And so some of the things that I want to point out is that there were some boundary issues that I was concerned about, and that's an important role. Like, we need to know where we stop and end with certain personnel on the team. Like this year, it's very clear that I'm part of the technical team. This type of gear, which I'm going to run off to the facility right after this, but like coach, I am a sport performance coach. I'm a mental health I can coach the guys on this. Just like Dylan was saying, if I'm around and accessible, like, hey, I was, shoot, me and my girlfriend had a fight. Like, I'm not present right now. I can't go out and train like I know I can. Like, let's talk about it. And then we do. I think that the systemic sort of interaction is I'm work very closely with our technical director, Jordan Farrell. I work really closely with our director of player development, Nana Atakora. They have a certain perspective that I don't get, and I have a certain perspective that they don't get, so that we work together. It's often that the coach, Juan Guerra, and I have our own talks and voice notes and texts about certain things that, like, hey, can you talk to this person? This player seeing this. And so we are a whole system that supports the athlete from all of our different areas of expertise. And we need to come together and realize our different roles, just like we ask our players to know their roles as they change every week, sometimes day to day. So I like that interaction. I think that, coaches are performers, athletic trainers are performers. And so being able to support them in that way with their own skills, the therapeutic piece, like, I can't be like Juan's therapist, like he's my colleague, right? So like there's particular ethics and boundaries around that. I can access my network to help him get that if for some reason he wanted that. But there's a fine line about like what is sport performance, what's mental health. It's just about our licenses and kind of like our roles, our regulations, the ethics. But anyone can look to me. I mean, front office staff ask me, my daughter needs a therapist. Can you help me find someone? But so like I person in the whole organization, and then be clear about my role and model that properly, so everyone is educated and understands like the newness of the presence of someone like me, understanding kind of what I can do and what's probably not the the for me or the athlete or coach or trainer to not be.
Great. I'm going to take these notes and pass them on to the writing staff at Ted Lasso. So perfect. They can get it right in the next season, hopefully. But yeah, I think a lot of great takeaways from that, and hopefully just opens up the conversation to say it's normal, right, to have a sports psychology professional, mental health professional on staff integrated into the team. And but we know working in this space that it's starting to happen, but it's not where it should be yet. And both of you have worked at several different teams and institutions, Dylan at USC and at University of Georgia, Lisa with Oakland Roots. So what was it that made these organizations open to the idea of bringing you onto their staff? And what would you say are the necessary requirements in order for something like that to happen? Whether you're at a club team, a high school, a college, what are the necessary pieces in order for that to work? So Lisa, I'll hand it to you.
What I found is, for people who know the Roots, they do so many things off the field. They're social justice oriented club. They are active in the community. We partner with very specific organizations. We're doing a talk this Saturday, actually a panel for our community partners at the facility. The first team is traveling, so we're able to do those types of things. And so, funny enough, I approached the Roots and said, like, hey, this is what I do. This is what I've been doing for 20 years. I'm shifting into the athlete space. Is this something that you'd be, welcome to having? Long story short, I'm in my second season now. And I think the reason why I chose the Roots and possibly why the Roots chose me is that we have similar values. As a licensed clinical social worker, the person in the environment, the athlete in the environment, the club in the environment is super important to look at, the different of the team and the organization, and to have that in my training and have that in my values as a person. And so that match was really, really good. Continues to be great. I think that there has to then be buy-in from the top down. There has to be, a support and respect and knowledge of what I do, and to be able to speak to that and honor it and value it and integrate it within different aspects of the organization. So knowing what I do, and that's just another opportunity to have a normalized conversation about mental health, sport. And of course, there's a big one, like funding, money to support it. Like it's going to be right now, probably one of the first things to cut. if that's something that is a problem. So like raising money for it, having people have the opportunity to be a donor, to sponsor, to like be involved in the universities or clubs like mine, to be a part of that. Because, you know, our time is valuable. What we do is valuable, and it should be valued again from the top down, and be often talked about and often sort of advocated for. Because, you know, when I meet with Jordan and not, it's like, oh wow, this part is a lot of their life. It's a lot of their mental health. This is how we can help them be better players. And that's when I talked to them. I was like, hey, you ready to talk to me about how you can be a better player? Okay. Like while they're doing their stationary work and I'm standing in front of them, captive audience. But so it's got to be something that's understood and accepted from the whole organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything Lisa said, especially the values piece. So important at the core of like why we do what we do, and the organization evaluating their athletes is a match. A couple of pieces I'll add is like, you know, I think it's interesting, Christina, you mentioned this is something that's growing. These positions are becoming more prominent, but we know there's more is needed, right? And I actually think within soccer, there's a huge space here for these roles to grow, because if you look at, say, and again, there is going to be a reality of finances here, just like Lisa said. But if you look at the NFL, the NBA, or the MLB, all of those players' associations have actually required the organizations to provide and create these roles within their teams for exactly this, for both mental health and for performance enhancement. And what you've actually seen is that the organizations realize, oh, wow, our athletes really use this. So one position with, say, the major league club becomes two positions, one with the developmental leagues and minor leagues, and one with the major league clubs, right? And the interesting thing from a soccer landscape is that if we look at the European models in the UK, we're actually seeing that more and more too. There are many clubs that have both. An individual with the first team, and even professionals in the academies and the developmental side, so that as you're progressing through that club environment, you're always having access to this as a resource. Not only does it normalize it, but more importantly, the general managers, owners, and then of course coaches are realizing we have to be providing this resource too. The thing I'll say though that I think is most important, and this goes back to values, is that what is your definition of success? Because I'll say this: if management is going to create a position like this and bring somebody in and think that, oh, we have this now, therefore we are going to win so many more games, usually that's a recipe for failure, frankly, because our position isn't concerned just with outcomes on the field. Now, I believe strongly they will come when you're providing support for the whole individual, right? You're providing support from a mental health standpoint that's integrated with performance, because like I said before, you're better able to weather the storms of adversity when you have more of a well-rounded self-concept, right? So if we can influence the culture, create better relationships amongst players, better cohesion within the team, a better understanding of our values and our purpose and where are we going as a group, then I actually believe the group gets better, the individuals get better, but the team gets better, and therefore we have team success. But a lot of times it's not going to be just like, oh, what's the missing ingredient? Oh, let's get the sports psych in, and now all of a sudden, like, it's going to translate into these victories. It has to be more of I believe, a longer term investment. And that to me goes back to the larger why of like, how do we advocate in the world of limited funding and cutting of positions, is that if we have this resource for individuals that we can help the athlete both manage their mental health, manage distress off the field, but also give them a resource to improve from a performance standpoint, mental skills training, and the actual application of psychology to performance, and we can offer it in this integrated way, what you find is overall improvements in like purpose, meaning, who I am, life satisfaction, that then does translate into on the field performance and sport performance outcomes. And so it's like by treating the whole, you get the individual successes that you want. If you only look individual on those successes and ignore the rest, I think the results are often limited and more fleeting. And so that's honestly the way that I propose these positions and talk about it with administrators is we have to be focused on the whole person. And there's plenty of professional athletes now that they're willing to speak out to that, and even organizations that have embraced it. So there's a lot more to point to, whereas it used to be you were sort of trying to educate and the groundwork didn't exist yet. The groundwork's there. So there's a lot of examples that can help you advocate.
I love what you both said, and I know we're just at our cutoff time here, which I definitely could continue this conversation. And what you just said about the defining success and doing so much to educate your audience, right, on coaches and sports leaders on why this matters. And that's a lot of what we do at MyHuddle. And we've worked with a high school now. We're about to go into our second year, and it's been helping educate them and showing the value of the work of bringing sports psychology providers to interact with their students, student athletes. And so, I know we still had a question here in the chat, but maybe just to close, I'd love for you both to say just your final words of advice for this women in soccer audience who might be interested in investing more in this. What would be your advice for them, whether you're a coach, an athlete, or a clinician yourself? What would be your piece of advice for them?
I'll go real quick. Mine is just,
okay, go Dylan.
We all go through our own stuff. Everybody has it. Everyone's working through it. Players, don't be afraid to reach out to talk about it. Coaches, don't be afraid to say, hey, how are you? Can I help support you? And honestly, coaches and staff, don't forget to ask your athletes about just how they are doing in their life, not just how they're doing with regard to the last training or competition.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And then just to add, like, coaches, trainers, the ecosystem that surrounds the athlete, like, make sure you're asking yourself or having someone ask you how you're doing as well, because you're in charge and supporting human beings, and you're a human being too. And so make sure that you are getting your support, because you don't want to go in there with your cup empty and then get burnt out, and then your mental health suffers. We got to also take care of that on our end.
Awesome. And I'll give my final words of advice. All of us are advocates and can be part of changing this culture in sports. We can't do it alone. And so, let's create that tidal wave and be the change we want to see.